Being an overcomer, it's one of those concepts that we absolutely love. We rejoice and we sing about. But the reality is so few experience it. In fact, more the norm seems to be the idea that we're just hanging on, that things are going to get worse, and they will. And that we're to just hang on until the Lord comes and rescues us. And He will. But in the middle, what's the experience expected to be like? That are we truly just here to hang on? Or, as we will see, the expectation from God is that we would be an overcomer. Or as Paul called it, more than a conqueror. That wouldn't be just a nice idea. It would be a reality. Now in this series we're going to explore that. We're going to explore why it has to start with us. And that understanding that the outcome and the overflow is not just that God is glorified and our circumstances are transformed, but it overflows and impacts others. But now, having said that, that doesn't negate the challenges. So all of this, the excerpts I'm using today are all from Romans chapter 8. And Paul is very real before he says that we're to be more than conquerors. He begins to just list a few of the challenges and dangers that we face. That is reality. But what's the outcome supposed to be? And in fact, that those challenges are so severe, he uses the analogy that we are like lambs led to the slaughter. In other words, we're all but helpless. But then he goes on and says, but in all these things, we are more than conquerors through Christ Jesus, the one who saved and redeemed us. But before we go into this, as this first episode, we've really got to get a sense of understanding how significant that is. That concept of being more than a conqueror literally means to prevail mightily, an exceeding victory. It's not just squeaking through. It's not just getting by. That literally, in spite of the dangers and challenges we face that are very real, that as we'll see, that our expectation should be through faith, God will empower us to have an overwhelming victory. Before we get into that, now through this series we'll explore the practical application. But we also need to put it in the context that Paul gave it to us in. That he does say before this that all things would work together for the good, for those who love God and are called. And that's not just a nice feel-good verse, because he goes on, he says how important this is. Because he goes on and he says that those who God chose before the foundation of the earth, that's you and I. See, that's the salvation paradox. That we say yes to Jesus, and in reality, we're only responding to that personal, that God chose each one, you and I, before the foundation of the earth. And He chose us that we would become in the image of His Son. And that we would share in His glory. And more than that, that on top of all of that, that He calls us justified. That in spite of our frequent and many failures that He's continuing to refine, in His eyes we are completely righteous already. So that nothing, even our own guilt, doesn't hold us back from experiencing that overcoming lifestyle. And that what we also see, though, is that to both make it a possibility and to convince us of the reality of it, that He made this amazing sacrifice, that He did not withhold His only Son, but He allowed His Son to be the ultimate sacrifice, both making all of this a possibility. Our right relationship with Him, our righteousness, and our overcoming are all consequences of that sacrifice. They were made possible by that sacrifice, and they, at the same time, that sacrifice should convince us of the sincerity of His promises. So through this series, we will explore what is the practical application, so we begin to see the increasing reality of prevailing mightily in everyday life, that we would see this as, again, an increasing reality, and that it would begin to impact others. The understanding that it starts with us. And as it starts with us, though, it also starts with, as everything does, everything begins with faith. That it begins with that expectation on our part that in spite of the frequent and sometimes dangerous challenges, that God desires for us to prevail mightily. And on top of all of that, Paul reminded us that Jesus now sits at the right hand of the Father, forever making intercession for you and I. What does that mean practically? It means right this moment, Jesus is at the right hand of God, praying for you and I, praying for our righteousness, praying for our overcoming mightily. Every aspect of our lives, He is going to bat for us at this very moment. He's at work on our behalf. And now it's time for us to go to work on His behalf. That He is forever interceding for us. Don't let that go to waste. That we would begin to be transformed and understand the call and the expectation that we would be more than conquerors.